The coffee cup sits on my kitchen counter like evidence of a crime I'm not sure I've committed. Steam rises from the perfectly prepared oat milk latte with an extra shot of espresso and a dash of cinnamon, exactly how I order it at Meridian Cafe every single morning. Richard left it there 20 minutes ago before disappearing into my shower, and I'm staring at it like it might reveal the secrets of the universe. Or at least the secrets of whatever the hell we're doing to each other. If this story hits you, drop a heart in the comments. 3 months. That's how long we've been doing this dance around each other, and I still can't figure out if I'm losing my mind or if he's sending me signals that contradict everything he says. Let's keep it casual. He told me that first night after the company happy hour, his hands already working at my belt buckle in my apartment hallway. No strings, no expectations, just fun. I agreed because I thought I could handle it. I thought I could compartmentalize the way his mouth felt against my neck from the way he completely ignored me during Monday morning meetings. I was wrong about a lot of things. The shower turns off, and I hear Richard moving around in my bathroom like he belongs there. 3 months of these morning routines, and he still acts surprised when I offer him a towel or suggest he keep a toothbrush here. That's not what this is, he always says. But then he shows up at my door at 7:30 with coffee that costs more than most people spend on lunch, prepared exactly the way I like it, from a cafe that's 15 minutes out of his way. I work at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm where I've spent 2 years carefully constructing the perfect straight guy persona. I mention dates with women named Sarah and Jessica, fictional women who conveniently live in other cities or have busy schedules that prevent them from ever meeting my coworkers. I laugh at the right jokes, make comments about attractive female clients, and never let my eyes linger too long on the wrong person. It's exhausting, but it's safe. It's the kind of safety that lets me keep my job and my sanity in a world that still isn't quite ready for people like me. Richard works 2 floors up in the design department, and he's everything I'm not. Confident, seemingly carefree, the kind of guy who wears vintage band t-shirts to client meetings and somehow makes it look professional. He's got dark hair that's always perfectly messy, like he just rolled out of bed, and these green eyes that see everything, including, apparently, the way I take my coffee. The bathroom door opens, and he emerges wearing yesterday's clothes, his hair damp, and his expression carefully neutral. This is the part where he usually makes some excuse about needing to get to work early or having plans later. This is the part where we pretend that what happened between my sheets 8 hours ago was just physical release between 2 consenting adults who happen to work in the same building. Thanks for the coffee, I say, testing the waters. You didn't have to do that. He shrugs, avoiding my eyes as he searches for his keys. I was passing by anyway. Figured I'd grab 2 instead of 1. It's a lie, and we both know it. Meridian Cafe is nowhere near his apartment or his usual route to work. I've done the math, traced the route on my phone during sleepless nights when I'm trying to understand what we're doing to each other. He has to leave his place 20 minutes early to make that stop, which means he's been setting his alarm earlier just to bring me coffee. That's not casual behavior. That's the kind of thing you do for someone you care about. But I don't say any of that. Instead, I watch him gather his things with practiced efficiency, the same routine we've perfected over 3 months of pretending this doesn't mean anything. He'll kiss me goodbye, a real kiss, not the kind you give to a casual hookup, and then we'll spend the next 8 hours at work acting like strangers. I'll see you around, he says, and there's something in his voice that makes me look up. For just a second, his carefully constructed casual facade slips, and I see something vulnerable in his expression, something that looks like longing. Then it's gone, replaced by that easy smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. He kisses me, his hand briefly cupping the back of my neck in a gesture that feels possessive and tender at the same time. Enjoy the coffee, he murmurs against my lips, and then he's gone, leaving me alone with the evidence of his caring and the growing certainty that we're both lying to ourselves about what this is. I take a sip of the latte, and it's perfect. Not just good, perfect. The exact temperature, the precise ratio of espresso to milk, the subtle sweetness that comes from knowing exactly how much cinnamon I prefer. This isn't something you get right by accident. This is something you get right by paying attention, by caring enough to notice the small details that make someone happy. My phone buzzes with a text from my friend Marcus. Still seeing that guy from work? I stare at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What am I supposed to say? That I'm falling for someone who insists we're just hooking up? That I'm developing feelings for a man who brings me my favorite coffee every morning but won't even acknowledge my existence in public? I delete the message without responding and finish my coffee, tasting the care in every sip. Richard can say whatever he wants about keeping things casual, but actions speak louder than words. And every morning, his actions are telling me a story that contradicts everything coming out of his mouth. The question is, what am I going to do about it? The marketing firm's open floor plan buzzed with Monday morning energy as Christopher settled into his desk, the familiar ritual of checking emails and reviewing campaign metrics providing a comfortable distraction from the confusion swirling in his chest. He'd been working at Meridian Marketing for 2 years, long enough to perfect the art of casual workplace conversation and carefully constructed references to weekend dates with women who existed only in his imagination. The deception had become second nature, a protective shell that kept his colleagues from asking too many questions about his personal life. "How was your weekend, Chris?" Sarah from Accounts Receivable called out as she passed his desk, coffee mug in hand. "Did you end up going out with that girl from the yoga class?" Christopher's fingers paused over his keyboard, the life forming effortlessly on his tongue. "Yeah, we grabbed dinner on Saturday. Nice girl, but I don't think there's much of a spark there." The words felt hollow, but they served their purpose, maintaining the straight persona he'd cultivated since his first day at the company. He learned that mentioning occasional dates kept people satisfied without requiring too much detail or follow-up questions. 3 desks over, Richard looked up from his computer screen, their eyes meeting for just a moment before both men quickly looked away. Richard Martinez had joined the graphic design team 6 months ago, bringing with him an easy confidence that seemed to draw people in effortlessly. He was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthdays, who could make the office printer work when it jammed, who somehow made even the most mundane client presentations feel engaging with his creative visual concepts. Christopher had noticed Richard immediately, of course. It was impossible not to notice the way Richard's dark hair fell across his forehead when he concentrated on his designs, or how his laugh carried across the office during team meetings. But Christopher had been careful to keep his observations professional, limiting their interactions to project collaborations and polite small talk in the break room. Everything changed 3 months ago at the company happy hour. The entire office had descended on Murphy's Pub after landing a major client, and the combination of celebration and alcohol had lowered everyone's usual workplace guards. Christopher had found himself at the bar next to Richard, both of them slightly tipsy and more relaxed than usual. Their conversation had flowed easily, moving from work topics to movies to travel, and somewhere between the 3rd and 4th round of drinks, Richard had leaned closer and asked quietly, "Want to get out of here?" The question had hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and risk. Christopher's heart had hammered against his ribs as he nodded, and they'd left the bar separately, Richard texting his address 20 minutes later. What happened in Richard's apartment that night had been everything Christopher had fantasized about and nothing he'd expected. Passionate but tender, urgent but careful, as if they were both afraid the moment might shatter if they moved too quickly. Afterward, as they lay catching their breath in Richard's bed, Richard had been the first to speak. "This was great," he'd said, his voice carefully casual. "But I think we should keep things simple, you know? No complications, no expectations. Just when we both want to." Christopher had agreed, of course. The alternative, admitting that he wanted more than casual encounters, that he'd been thinking about Richard for months before that night, seemed too risky. So they'd established their arrangement, discreet, casual, and completely separate from their professional lives. Richard would text late at night, usually after they'd both had a few drinks, and Christopher would respond with his address. Richard would arrive within the hour, they'd lose themselves in each other for a few hours, and Richard would leave before dawn, both of them pretending nothing had happened when they saw each other at work the next day. The system worked, mostly. Christopher had gotten good at compartmentalizing, at treating their encounters as physical release rather than emotional connection. He'd learned to ignore the way Richard's touch lingered sometimes, or how Richard would trace patterns on his chest while they talked quietly in the darkness. Those moments felt too intimate for their casual arrangement, so Christopher filed them away as meaningless gestures, the kind of thing that happened naturally between two people sharing physical space. But then Richard had started showing up with coffee. It began 3 weeks ago, a Tuesday morning when Christopher was running late and skipping his usual cafe stop. Richard had appeared at his desk with a cup from Grind Coffee, Christopher's favorite place 6 blocks from the office. "Thought you might need this," Richard had said with a casual smile, setting the cup down and walking away before Christopher could respond properly. The coffee had been perfect, medium roast, oat milk, 1 sugar. Exactly how Christopher ordered it every morning on his way to work. He'd stared at the cup for a long moment, trying to convince himself it was just a coincidence that Richard had guessed his preferences or asked someone else in the office. But the next morning, Richard had appeared again with the same order. In the morning after that, and every morning since, always with the same casual explanation. I was passing by anyway, or they had a short line today, or figured you could use the caffeine boost. Christopher had tried to read nothing into the gesture. Bringing a coworker coffee was normal, friendly behavior. The fact that Richard never brought coffee for anyone else in the office, or that he somehow knew Christopher's exact order without ever asking, could be explained away. The fact that Richard's eyes lingered on Christopher's face when he handed over the cup, searching for some reaction, was probably just Christopher's imagination. But sitting at his desk now, sipping the perfectly prepared coffee that Richard had delivered 20 minutes earlier, Christopher couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. The coffee ritual felt too personal, too consistent, too much like the kind of thing someone did when they cared about more than just casual hookups. He glanced over at Richard's desk again, watching as Richard consulted with a junior designer about color palettes for a new campaign. Richard's professional demeanor was flawless, focused, helpful, completely appropriate. There was no hint of the man who had whispered Christopher's name in the darkness just 2 nights ago, no suggestion of the careful way Richard had kissed his shoulder before leaving at dawn. Christopher's phone buzzed with a text from his friend Marcus. "Coffee later? Need to hear about your mysterious situation." Christopher had mentioned Richard to Marcus in vague terms, describing him as someone from work, without providing details about their arrangement or even Richard's name. Marcus had picked up on Christopher's conflicted feelings immediately, pressing for more information that Christopher wasn't ready to share. As Christopher typed back a response agreeing to meet Marcus after work, he caught Richard looking in his direction again. This time, Richard didn't look away immediately. Instead, he offered a small smile, not the broad, professional smile he used with other colleagues, but something softer, more private. Something that made Christopher's chest tighten with a mixture of hope and confusion. The smile lasted only a moment before Richard returned his attention to his computer, but it was enough to remind Christopher why their arrangement had become so complicated. Richard's actions spoke of care and attention that went far beyond casual interest, even as his words insisted on keeping things simple and uncommitted. Christopher took another sip of his perfectly prepared coffee and tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept returning to the same question that had been haunting him for weeks. What did it mean when someone said they wanted to keep things casual but showed up every morning with exactly the kind of care that suggested otherwise? The third week of Richard's coffee ritual began on a Monday that felt different somehow. I sat at my desk, staring at the perfectly prepared latte he'd placed there 20 minutes earlier, watching the foam art slowly dissolve into abstract shapes. Around me, the morning bustle of Meridian marketing continued as usual, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the low hum of professional conversation, but I felt suspended in a bubble of confusion that seemed to grow thicker with each passing day. "Earth to Christopher," Jessica from Accounts Receivable called out as she walked past my cubicle. "You're staring at that coffee like it holds the secrets of the universe." I forced a laugh and took a sip, the familiar warmth spreading through my chest in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. Just thinking about the Peterson campaign, I lied smoothly, the same way I'd been lying about everything else in my life for months. The truth was, I couldn't stop analyzing Richard's behavior. Every morning for 3 weeks straight, he'd appeared at my desk with my exact order: medium oat milk latte, extra shot, light foam, with a dash of cinnamon. Not once had he forgotten. Not once had he brought me something different. When I'd casually mentioned that I preferred the coffee from Grind and Brew over the office machine, he'd started bringing it from there specifically, even though it was 15 minutes out of his way. This wasn't casual behavior. This was the kind of attention to detail that spoke of genuine care, of someone who listened when I talked, who remembered the small things that mattered to me. But every time I tried to bring it up during our encounters, Richard would deflect with that easy smile of his, insisting it was just convenient since he passed the cafe anyway. I glanced across the office to where Richard sat in the design department, his dark hair catching the morning light as he leaned over his computer screen. Even from this distance, I could see the focused expression he wore when he was deep in creative work, the slight furrow between his brows that I'd learned to recognize during our intimate moments. The same expression he'd worn last Tuesday night when he'd traced patterns on my chest with his fingertips, both of us pretending it was just physical even as the gesture felt impossibly tender. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Coffee date later? You've been weird lately." I typed back quickly. "Can't today. Work stuff." Another lie. The truth was, I'd been avoiding Marcus because I knew he'd see right through me. He'd take one look at my face and know I was falling for someone, and then he'd want details I couldn't give. How could I explain that I was developing feelings for a coworker who brought me coffee every morning but insisted we were just casual? How could I admit that I was terrified of wanting more when more might mean losing everything we had? Christopher. I looked up to find Richard standing beside my desk, and my heart did that familiar skip that I'd been trying to ignore for weeks. He was wearing the navy button-down that brought out his eyes, and there was something different in his expression, softer somehow, more uncertain than his usual confident demeanor. "Hey," I managed, hyper-aware of my coworkers nearby. "What's up? I wanted to remind you about the client presentation on Thursday. The Peterson campaign materials should be ready by Wednesday afternoon." His voice was perfectly professional, but his eyes lingered on mine a moment longer than necessary. "Right. Thursday." I nodded, trying to match his tone even as I noticed the way he was fidgeting with his pen. "I'll make sure everything's coordinated on my end." "Good." He hesitated, then added quietly, "You seemed stressed about it last night." "I just wanted to make sure you knew I had everything handled." Last night, when I'd been lying in his arms after we'd made love, because that's what it had been, no matter what we called it, and I'd mentioned my anxiety about the presentation. He'd listened, really listened, asking questions about my concerns and offering reassurance in a way that felt distinctly boyfriend-like. Then he'd kissed my forehead and told me everything would be fine, and I'd had to bite back the words that wanted to spill out, that I was falling for him, that I wanted this to be real, that I was tired of pretending we were just hooking up. "Thanks," I said now, my voice slightly hoarse. "I appreciate that." He smiled, and for a moment, the professional mask slipped completely. The look he gave me was warm and intimate, the same look he'd given me in the dark of my bedroom when he thought I was asleep. It lasted only seconds before he caught himself, straightening up and glancing around to make sure no one had noticed. "Well, I should get back to work," he said, his voice carefully neutral again. I watched him walk away, noting the way his shoulders tensed as he resumed his professional persona. This was the dance we'd been doing for 3 months, intimate and connected in private, strangers in public. But lately, the lines had been blurring. The coffee ritual was just the beginning. Last week, I'd found my favorite protein bars in my desk drawer, the ones I'd mentioned craving during a late-night conversation. 2 days ago, Richard had casually asked how my presentation prep was going, then lingered to listen to my answer with genuine interest. Yesterday, he texted me a funny meme during lunch that was so perfectly tailored to my sense of humor that it made my chest ache with longing. These weren't the actions of someone who wanted to keep things casual. These were the actions of someone who was falling just as hard as I was, but was too scared to admit it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my computer screen without seeing it, my mind racing through every interaction we'd had over the past weeks. The way Richard's touch had grown more tender, more lingering. The way he'd started staying longer after we were finished, talking quietly in the dark about everything and nothing. The way he'd begun to look at me when he thought I wasn't watching, with an expression that was anything but casual. But then there was the other side of it, the way he'd tense up if I got too comfortable, too affectionate. The way he'd make jokes about keeping things light whenever the conversation turned serious. The way he'd establish the rules of our arrangement from the very beginning, making it clear that he didn't want anything more than what we had. I was caught in an impossible situation. Every instinct I had told me that Richard's feelings were deeper than he was admitting, but I was terrified of being wrong. What if I was reading too much into his gestures? What if the coffee really was just convenient, and I was projecting my own desires onto his actions? The thought of losing him entirely was unbearable. At least this way, I got to have him in some capacity. I got to feel his hands on my skin, got to wake up next to him on the nights he stayed over, got to pretend for a few hours that we were something more than just a casual arrangement. But pretending was becoming harder every day. Every morning when he brought me coffee, every small gesture of care, every moment of unexpected tenderness, it all felt like a slow form of torture. I was living in a constant state of hope and fear, wanting more but terrified to ask for it. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Richard. Lunch. I stared at the message, my heart racing. We'd never had lunch together at work. It was too risky, too much like dating. But here he was, suggesting it anyway. I typed back, "Isn't that against the rules?" His response came quickly. "Maybe I'm tired of some of the rules." I read the message 3 times, trying to decode what he meant. Was this his way of saying he wanted more too? Or was I reading too much into it again? Before I could lose my nerve, I typed, "Okay. Where?" "That sandwich place on 5th. 12:30. See you there." I set my phone down with shaking hands, my mind spinning with possibilities. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe Richard was finally ready to admit that what we had was more than casual. Or maybe I was setting myself up for disappointment again. But as I looked at the empty coffee cup on my desk, the coffee he brought me every single morning for 3 weeks, I realized I was tired of living in limbo. I was tired of pretending that his gestures didn't mean anything, tired of acting like I didn't want more when every fiber of my being was screaming for something real. Whatever happened at lunch, I knew I couldn't keep going like this much longer. The space between what we had and what I wanted was becoming too painful to bear, and Richard's mixed signals were driving me slowly insane. I glanced at the clock, 11:45. In 45 minutes, I'd find out if I'd been imagining the deeper connection between us, or if Richard was finally ready to acknowledge what had been building between us all along. The lunch invitation hung between us like a bridge I was terrified to cross. Richard had asked me to join him at that little bistro downtown, the one we'd walked past countless times but never entered together. It felt monumental, this simple request, because lunch meant daylight, meant being seen together outside the safety of my apartment or the careful neutrality of our office interactions. I spent the entire morning in a state of nervous anticipation, checking my phone obsessively for any sign that Richard might cancel. The presentation I'd been dreading was scheduled for 2 o'clock, and my stomach churned with a mixture of professional anxiety and something deeper, more personal. Richard had remembered this presentation, had asked about it twice this week, and somehow that attention felt more intimate than any of our midnight encounters. When noon arrived, I found myself standing outside the bistro, adjusting my tie for the 3rd time and wondering if I was reading too much into everything. Richard appeared around the corner, and my breath caught at the sight of him in the afternoon sunlight. There was something different about seeing him like this, away from the fluorescent office lights in the dim intimacy of my bedroom. He looked nervous too, I realized, his usual confident stride slightly hesitant as he approached. "You made it," he said, and there was relief in his voice that made my chest tighten. "Did you think I wouldn't?" I don't know what I thought. He held the door open for me, and our fingers brushed as I passed. The contact sent electricity up my arm, the same spark that had been building between us for weeks now, threatening to ignite something neither of us was supposed to want. We found a quiet table in the back corner, away from the lunch crowd of office workers and students. Richard ordered for both of us without asking, somehow knowing exactly what I'd want, and I felt that familiar flutter of recognition that he'd been paying attention to details I hadn't even realized I'd shared. "How are you feeling about the presentation?" he asked, leaning forward slightly, his eyes focused entirely on me. "Terrified," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. "I've been working on it for weeks, but I keep second-guessing everything." "You'll be brilliant," he said with such certainty that I almost believed him. "I've seen your work, Christopher. You have this way of making complex ideas feel accessible. It's one of the things He stopped abruptly, his jaw tightening as if he'd caught himself about to say something dangerous. "One of the things you what?" I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "One of the things I admire about your work," he finished carefully, but his eyes told a different story. They lingered on my face with an intensity that made me feel exposed, seen in a way that went far beyond professional appreciation. The food arrived, providing a temporary escape from the weight of unspoken words. We ate in relative silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, there was a charged quality to the quiet, as if we were both holding our breath, waiting for something to shift. "Richard," I started, then stopped, unsure how to voice the questions that had been building inside me. "How do I ask why you bring me coffee every morning? How do I ask why you remember things about me that lovers remember, not casual hookups? How do I ask if you feel this too, this growing thing between us that's becoming impossible to ignore? What is it?" he asked softly, and something in his tone made me look up. His guard was down, just for a moment, and I saw vulnerability there that matched my own. "I don't know how to do this," I whispered, gesturing vaguely between us. "I don't know what this is supposed to be." Richard's hand moved across the table, stopping just short of mine. "I don't either," he admitted, and the confession hung between us like a revelation. We walked back to the office in silence, the weight of our mutual uncertainty creating a bubble around us that felt both fragile and precious. I was acutely aware of his presence beside me, the way he matched his stride to mine, the careful distance he maintained that somehow felt more intimate than touching. The presentation went better than I'd expected. Richard had been right about my ability to make complex ideas accessible, and I found myself drawing confidence from his earlier words of encouragement. When it was over, when the last handshake had been exchanged and the conference room had emptied, I felt a surge of relief so intense it left me slightly dizzy. I was gathering my materials when Richard appeared in the doorway. "How did it go?" he asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. "Good," I said, unable to keep the grin off my face. "Really good, actually. I knew it would be." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, and suddenly we were alone in a way we rarely were at work. "You were amazing up there, Christopher." I could see it from the hallway. "You were watching?" I couldn't help myself. The admission slipped out before he could stop it, and I saw the moment he realized what he'd revealed. His face flushed slightly, and he looked away. "I mean, I was just passing by and—" "Richard." I set down my papers and took a step toward him. "You don't have to explain." But something in my tone, maybe the gentleness or the understanding, seemed to break something open in him. His carefully constructed composure cracked, and I saw the fear underneath, the same fear I'd been carrying for weeks. "I can't keep doing this," he said suddenly, his voice strained. "I can't keep pretending that this is just casual when He stopped, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "When I think about you constantly. When I wake up and the first thing I want to do is see you. When I find myself buying your favorite coffee every morning because I know it makes you smile." My heart stopped. "Richard." "No, let me finish." He looked at me with desperate intensity. I told myself I could handle casual. I told myself that's all I wanted. But I've been lying to both of us, and I can't do it anymore. This thing between us, whatever it is, it's not casual. At least not for me. The room felt airless, charged with the electricity of truth finally spoken. I wanted to reach for him, to close the distance between us, but something in his posture held me back. "I think we need to stop," he said quietly, and the words hit me like a physical blow. "I think we need to take a break from this arrangement before I do something stupid like fall in love with you." The irony of his words would have been funny if they hadn't been breaking my heart. Too late, I wanted to tell him. Too late for both of us. "Is that what you want?" I managed to ask, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "It's what I need," he said, but his eyes were pleading with me to understand, to argue, to fight for us in a way he couldn't seem to fight for himself. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and watched as he left the conference room, leaving me alone with the wreckage of everything I'd been too afraid to hope for. The week that followed felt like walking through quicksand. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping to see Richard's familiar silhouette through my kitchen window, carrying 2 cups from grind coffee. Instead, I'd stare at my empty counter and make instant coffee that tasted like disappointment. At work, we moved around each other like strangers. Richard would nod politely when we passed in the hallway, the same distant acknowledgement he gave everyone else. No more lingering glances during meetings. No more finding excuses to stop by my desk. No more small talk that felt loaded with everything we weren't saying. I threw myself into work, staying late every night to avoid going home to an apartment that still smelled faintly of his cologne. My productivity shot through the roof, but Sarah from accounting kept asking if I was feeling okay because I looked like I hadn't slept in days. She wasn't wrong. The worst part was the coffee. Every morning at exactly 8:15, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway and my heart would leap, thinking maybe today would be different. But it was always someone else. By Thursday, I realized I'd been unconsciously timing my arrival to coincide with what used to be our routine. The recognition of my own pathetic hope made me want to disappear. Friday afternoon, I found myself staring at Richard across the conference room during our weekly team meeting. He was presenting design concepts for the Morrison campaign, his voice steady and professional. But I caught him glancing at me twice, quick looks that he immediately covered by checking his notes. When he stumbled slightly over a word, I felt a twisted satisfaction that maybe I wasn't the only one struggling with this forced distance. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a beer I didn't want, replaying every moment from that night he'd stayed over. The way he'd held me when I broke down. How right it had felt to wake up with his arm around my waist. The panic in his eyes the next morning when he realized what we'd done. I kept trying to reconcile the man who'd whispered, "I think about you constantly," with the one who decided we needed to stop everything. The contradiction was eating me alive. Saturday morning, I did something I'd never done before. I went to grind coffee alone. Maybe it was masochistic, but I needed to understand what this ritual had meant to him. Was it really just convenience, like he'd claimed? Or had there been something more deliberate about choosing my exact order every single day for 3 months? The barista, a guy named Marcus with sleeve tattoos, recognized me immediately. "Hey, where's your boyfriend? Haven't seen him all week." The word hit me like a physical blow. Boyfriend? Yeah, the tall guy with the great smile. He's been coming in every morning for months, always orders the same thing. Large dark roast, no sugar, and a medium vanilla latte with oat milk. Same order, same time, like clockwork. Marcus started preparing my drink without asking. He always seemed so happy when he talked about bringing you coffee. Said it was his favorite part of the morning. I stood there, stunned. Richard had been coming here every single day, not just when it was convenient. He'd been making a deliberate detour, spending his own money, and apparently talking about me to strangers. The barista's casual use of boyfriend suggested Richard had never corrected the assumption. Did he? I cleared my throat. Did he ever say anything else about me? Marcus grinned. Man, he talked about you all the time. How you take your coffee, how you get this little crease between your eyebrows when you're concentrating, how you always thank him even though he brings it every day. Honestly, it was kind of sweet how gone he was on you. The past tense felt like a knife twist, but the information was a revelation. Richard hadn't been performing casual interest. He'd been performing casualness while being completely devoted. I spent the rest of the weekend analyzing every interaction we'd had, looking for signs I'd missed. The way he'd remembered my presentation schedule, how he'd started leaving granola bars in my desk drawer after I'd mentioned skipping breakfast once. The careful way he'd learned my coffee preferences, not just the basics but the specifics, oat milk, not regular, vanilla but not too sweet. None of that was casual behavior. That was boyfriend behavior. By Monday morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't continue living in this limbo, pretending I was fine with how things had ended. Richard's actions had been telling a completely different story than his words, and I needed to know which version was true. I arrived at work early and positioned myself in the parking lot, waiting. At 8:10, Richard's Honda pulled into his usual spot. I watched him sit in his car for a moment, staring at the building like he was gathering courage. When he finally got out, I saw him glance toward the coffee shop across the street, his expression pained. This was it. I couldn't let him walk into that building and pretend we were nothing to each other for another day. Richard. I stepped out from behind a parked car, my heart hammering against my ribs. He froze, his briefcase halfway out of his back seat. Christopher. Hi. We need to talk. I don't think that's a good idea. He closed his car door but didn't move toward the building. We agreed. You agreed, I interrupted. You decided we needed to stop, right after you told me you think about me constantly. Right after you held me all night. Right after you acted like someone who cared about me. His jaw tightened. I was trying to do the right thing. The right thing for who? I took a step closer, my voice rising slightly. Because it sure as hell wasn't right for me. And judging by how miserable you've looked all week, it wasn't right for you either. Richard glanced around the parking lot, checking for coworkers. Keep your voice down. No. The word came out harder than I intended. I'm tired of keeping my voice down. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of letting you make decisions about my life without asking what I want. What you want. He turned to face me fully, his eyes flashing. You want to keep sneaking around? You want to keep lying to everyone we work with? You want to keep pretending this is just sex when we both know it stopped being casual months ago? The admission hung between us like a challenge. I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of the knot I'd been carrying all week. So you admit it, I said quietly. It wasn't casual. Richard's shoulders sagged. Christopher. Bringing someone their favorite coffee every single morning isn't casual, Richard. The barista at Grind thinks we're boyfriends because you've been going there every day for 3 months, talking about me, learning exactly how I like my drink. I watched his face change as he realized what I discovered. That's not convenience. That's devotion. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the asphalt, the morning sun casting long shadows between us. I'm scared, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Of what? Of wanting this too much. Of ruining everything by wanting more than you're willing to give. Of being the guy who falls in love with his casual hookup and makes it weird. He ran a hand through his hair. I've never done this before, Christopher. I've never been in a real relationship with a man. I don't know how to do this without screwing it up. The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache. So instead of talking to me about it, you decided to end everything? I thought it would be easier. Easier for who? Because this week has been hell for me. And you look like you haven't slept since Tuesday. Richard laughed, but it sounded hollow. I haven't. I keep reaching for my phone to text you, then remembering I can't. I drove to Grind 3 times this week and turned around in the parking lot because I couldn't handle Marcus asking where you were. I felt my resolve solidifying. So let's stop pretending this is casual. Let's stop pretending we don't care about each other. Let's stop making decisions based on fear and start making them based on what we actually want. "And what do you want?" he asked, his voice careful. I took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment that would change everything. "I want you to pick me up for dinner tonight. I want to hold your hand in public. I want to introduce you to my friends as my boyfriend, not my coworker. I want to wake up next to you on weekends and not have you sneak out before dawn." I paused, my heart racing. "I want to try being real with you, Richard. Not casual. Not secret. Real." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his fear against his desire. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Let's try real." I spotted Richard's car in the parking lot and knew I couldn't wait another moment. My hand shook as I walked toward him, the morning air sharp against my skin. He was leaning against his sedan, scrolling through his phone with that same casual expression he'd worn all week when he passed my desk without a word. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set just a little too tight. "Richard." My voice came out steadier than I felt. He looked up, and for a split second, I saw something vulnerable flash across his face before his mask slipped back into place. "Hey, Christopher. How's it going?" "Don't." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Don't do that. Don't pretend like nothing happened between us." He straightened, shoving his phone into his pocket. "I thought we agreed to take a break. Keep things professional." "Professional?" I stepped closer, my voice dropping to avoid any coworkers who might be arriving early. "Richard, you brought me coffee every single morning for 3 months. Every morning. That's not professional, and it's sure as hell not casual." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in that carefully constructed indifference. "It was just convenient. I told you, I passed the cafe anyway." "Bullshit." The word hung between us like a challenge. "You know what's convenient? Grabbing any coffee from the lobby downstairs. You know what's not convenient? Driving 15 minutes out of your way to go to grind coffee, memorizing exactly how I like my drink, and showing up at my apartment every morning like clockwork." Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. I could see him building his walls higher, preparing to deflect, and I knew I had to push harder before he shut me out completely. "The barista thinks we're boyfriends, Richard. Marcus. He told me you've been going there every day for 3 months, talking about me. Talking about how I like my coffee, asking about pastries you think I might enjoy. Does that sound casual to you? You don't understand it. Then explain it to me." I stepped closer, close enough to see the conflict warring in his eyes. "Explain how someone who wants to keep things casual remembers that I have a presentation on Wednesdays and leaves encouraging notes in my desk drawer. Explain how someone who doesn't want anything serious stays up all night holding me when I'm stressed about work." His composure cracked, just slightly. "Christopher, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "No, you're making it complicated." My voice rose slightly before I caught myself, glancing around the parking lot. "You're the one who's been acting like my boyfriend while insisting we're just hooking up. You're the one who panicked when you realized you'd been caring for me, and now you're trying to convince both of us that none of it meant anything." Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen him make countless times when he was frustrated. "You don't get it. This isn't. I can't just." "Can't just what?" I pressed. "Can't just admit that you have feelings? Can't just acknowledge that bringing someone their favorite coffee every morning isn't something you do for a casual hookup? It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." I took another step closer, my voice softening slightly. "Richard, I've been watching you for 3 months. I've seen how you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. I've felt how you hold me when we're alone. That's not casual. That's not just convenience." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ground between us. When he finally looked up, I saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. "You want to know the truth? Fine. The truth is that I've never done this before. I've never been in a real relationship with a man. I've never wanted to be in one." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to stay quiet, to let him continue. "The coffee thing started because I wanted to see you. Because I couldn't stop thinking about you between our encounters. Because I wanted to take care of you in some small way without having to admit what that meant." His voice was getting quieter, more vulnerable. "And then it became this routine, this excuse to see you every morning, to make sure you were okay, to be part of your day in a way that felt real. Richard, I talked to Marcus about you because I couldn't talk to anyone else. Because you were the only thing on my mind, and I needed to say your name out loud to someone, even if it was just the barista who makes your coffee." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do you know how pathetic that is? I was living for those 10 minutes every morning when I could pretend we were something more." The honesty in his voice was devastating. I could see how much this admission was costing him, how terrified he was of being this exposed. Then why did you end it? I asked softly. Why did you run when things got real? Because I was falling in love with you. The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back for months. Because I woke up that morning after holding you all night, and I realized I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay and make you breakfast and talk about your day and be your boyfriend. And that terrified me. The parking lot felt impossibly quiet around us. I could hear my own heartbeat, could see the way Richard's hands were trembling slightly at his sides. I've never been anyone's boyfriend, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I've never wanted to be. I've spent years convincing myself that I was fine with casual, that I didn't need anything deeper. And then you happened, and suddenly I was memorizing your coffee order and buying you snacks and staying up all night just to watch you sleep. Richard. I reached out, my fingers brushing against his wrist. That's not something to be afraid of. That's something beautiful. He looked down at where our skin touched, and I saw something shift in his expression. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need. You've been what I need for 3 months, I said gently. You just called it the wrong thing. He was quiet for a long moment, processing my words. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I've been miserable this week. Absolutely miserable. I kept driving to grind coffee out of habit, and Marcus kept asking where you were, and I didn't know what to tell him. Tell him his favorite couple had a fight, but they're working it out. Richard's mouth quirked up in the smallest smile. Are we? Working it out? I don't know, I said honestly. But I know I can't keep pretending that what we have is casual. And I know you can't either, no matter how scared you are. He nodded slowly, like he was making a decision. I want to try. I want to try being your boyfriend, even if I'm terrible at it. Even if I don't know what I'm doing. You won't be terrible at it, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You've been practicing for 3 months. The silence stretched between us in the parking lot, broken only by the distant hum of morning traffic. Richard's admission hung in the air like morning mist, vulnerable and raw. I watched him struggle with his own words, his hands trembling slightly as he held his coffee cup. I've never done this before, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Not with a man. Not for real. Something in his tone made my chest tighten. All those mornings, all those careful gestures, all those moments when he looked at me like I was something precious, it all made sense now. He'd been trying to love me the only way he knew how, through small acts of devotion disguised as convenience. Richard, I said softly, stepping closer. We don't have to figure it all out right now. We just have to be honest about what we want. He looked up at me then, and I saw fear mixed with hope in his eyes. I want to try, he said. I want to try being us. Really us. The word, us, hit me like a physical force. After 3 months of pretending we were nothing, hearing him claim us as something real felt revolutionary. Okay, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. So what does that look like? I don't know, he admitted with a shaky laugh. Maybe we start with dinner? Like, an actual date where I pick you up and we don't have to pretend we barely know each other. I couldn't help but smile. That sounds perfect. We agreed to meet that evening, and for the first time in a week, Richard's shoulders seemed to relax. As we walked back toward the office building, he caught my arm gently. Christopher, he said, I'm scared I'm going to mess this up. I don't know how to be someone's boyfriend. You've been acting like my boyfriend for months, I pointed out. You just called it something else. The truth of that seemed to settle something in him. The coffee thing was the sweetest thing anyone's ever done for me, I finished. Even if you were too stubborn to admit what it meant. That evening, Richard picked me up at 7 sharp, looking nervous and handsome in a button-down shirt I'd never seen before. He'd clearly put thought into this, our first official date, and the effort made my heart race. You look good, I said as I got into his car. So do you, he replied, then paused. Is it weird that I'm nervous? We've been. We know each other. We know each other's bodies, I said gently. But we're just starting to know each other's hearts. Dinner was a revelation. Without the weight of secrecy and the pretense of casualness, Richard opened up in ways I'd never seen. He told me about his family, his fears about coming out at work, his complete inexperience with male relationships. I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone. My own struggles with being closeted, my fear of wanting too much, my loneliness even when we were together. I used to lie awake after you left, I admitted over dessert, wondering if you thought about me at all. I thought about you constantly, he said. That's why I had to leave. If I'd stayed, I would have had to admit that what we were doing wasn't casual at all. What was it then? He was quiet for a long moment. It was me falling in love with you and being too scared to say it. The words hit me like a physical force. Richard. I know it's complicated, he said quickly. I know I hurt you by pretending otherwise. But I'm here now, and I'm trying to be brave enough to do this right. You are brave, I said. Braver than you think. We talked until the restaurant began closing around us, and when Richard drove me home, neither of us wanted the evening to end. He walked me to my door, and for a moment, we stood there like teenagers, unsure of the protocol. I should probably go, he said, but he made no move to leave. You could stay, I offered. Not for. I mean, just to stay. Something in his expression softened. I like that. That night, we lay in bed just talking, Richard's arm around me as I rested my head on his chest. It was intimate in a way our previous encounters had never been, vulnerable and real and unguarded. I want to introduce you to my friend Stephen, I said into the darkness. He's been asking why I've been so miserable lately. I'd like that, Richard said. And maybe we could figure out how to be ourselves at work. Not hiding, but not making it everyone's business either. We'll figure it out, I said. Together. The next morning, Richard was still there when I woke up, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel that familiar pang of abandonment. Instead, I felt hope. Coffee? He asked, already reaching for his phone. Let me guess, I said with a smile. You know a place. He laughed, and the sound was lighter than I'd ever heard it. Actually, I was thinking we could go together this time. I'd like Marcus to meet my boyfriend properly. The word boyfriend sent warmth spreading through my chest. I'd like that too. As we got ready together, sharing my bathroom mirror and stealing glances at each other, I realized that all those mornings of careful coffee deliveries had been leading to this. Not just the caffeine, but the companionship. Not just the gesture, but the genuine care behind it. Richard had been showing me he loved me for months. Now, finally, we were both brave enough to say it out loud.